Okay, we're recording bang on 11 o'clock. So,
Are we waiting for more people to come in, or is this everyone?
I'd say get started. I've got another meeting at 11:40.
Yeah.
I was assuming we'd take like 20 to 30 minutes, but with questions and stuff.
Okay, brilliant. In that case, I'll just drive. If we've only got sort of 30 minutes, I'll dive straight into it. Just because there's quite a few things here that I sort of thought we'd go over. I'm going to give a really brief role of what I do, who I am, etc., and then just go straight into it. So just going over for anyone, I don't obviously. Sean's explained to me that a number of people here are predominantly working with sort of finding vendors, dealing with contact information, booking in valuation appointments, etc. For those of you who I've never met, my name is William. I have worked in client services in London, in a state agency, both for Fine and Country and other agencies now for I think about 7 years. And in that time, I've seen the industry change quite a lot. For anyone who's ever worked for one of the high street brands, such as Foxtons, Knight Frank, Savills, Spice of Heart, etc., you're probably very familiar with the hubs. They call them different things. It can be client services, can be hub, Nexus, etc., etc. Each agency now has a centralized call center who predominantly deal with inbound data and internal data. With Fine and Country and what we do here at Fine and Country, we take a much more proactive approach where we go out, we actually get the vendor's contact information, etc., and then hopefully generate business off the back of that. How I go about doing that. So I've sort of just tried to come up with this diagram here to sort of help explain, and I understand that you guys do things in your own way and you'll have different things, but when I take on a patch and when I look at a patch for what I do, the first thing that I will do when analyzing that patch is go straight onto Rightmove. Rightmove has a wonderful function where you can organize listings by the oldest listed. And from there, I will then look at the oldest listed properties and work my way forward to the current date. A standard agency contract, if you're Knight Frank or Savills or one of the high streets, will last anywhere between 9 to 12 weeks. Some are longer, some are shorter. But obviously, if it's been on the market for more than 12 weeks, in my opinion, you've got a very good chance of at least booking an evaluation appointment and going to see the vendor and having a coffee. You might not take it on, but it's a very, it's a touch point that you should, as a minimum, be exercising. Now, when it comes to finding the actual properties, my understanding is that everyone here has had a degree of experience with that, and I don't necessarily, need to go through that in detail, but for a couple of quick pointers on this, obviously Google Maps is a brilliant way to go about doing that. But also for anyone who doesn't know, Bing Maps actually, obviously I know Bing is a very underutilized search engine, but Bing is owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft actually won a tender process with our government. This was about 2 years ago, where the government's land registry system is actually built through Bing. And if you go to Bing Maps, I think I'm showing my entire screen here, so I'm assuming you can see what I'm doing on this. But if I just go on Bing Maps here and I go to satellite image, for example, if you go to anywhere in the country with Bing Maps and you go down to a property, it normally has the number. Now, I don't know if you can see on my screen, it's normally got the actual number of the property listed above it. But if you actually right-click the property as well, it will come up with the address right on the map, right there. So this is 6 Selfton Park Cottages. If I just throw this anywhere here, it'll normally come up again. We've got Pine Grove Park Road. So just getting the address now is easier than ever for pretty much any property in the United Kingdom. And that is because Bing Maps has basically done a deal with our government where effectively you're looking at one and the same thing with the land registry. But obviously the land registry will give you the name of the vendor as well. And then I don't know if anyone here uses Land Insight, but Land Insight effectively is another way that you can go about doing the same thing Same as Bing Maps, basically. You don't really need it if all you're doing is getting the addresses. For anyone who sort of is more involved in property development, Land Insight is a great tool for that, but that's probably a conversation for another day. When it comes to getting the name of the vendor, obviously you've got the land registry for £3 a pop. You can basically get the person's name, buying the title deed. Failing that, if you want to try and save the money, I would always go to Company's House and put the address of the property into Company's House. I understand that not everyone on this call necessarily is part of the Fine and Country brand. Sean, correct me if I'm wrong there. But for the lower quartile of the market, for example, or the middle quartile of the market, not necessarily going to be on Company's House. I do find with the upper quartile that most vendors in some form are on Company's House, be it that they, they're directors, they are investors, they have their own companies, etc. They could be freelancers as well, and the chances are that in some capacity they are on Company's House under the address, and you can get their name. Now, in terms of contact information for vendors, there's a lot of different ways that you can actually go about doing it these days. The go-to tool for my first point of contact normally is Lucia. So I focus predominantly on properties at the upper quartile of the market. And my first point of call with those kind of vendors will be Lucia. For anyone who doesn't know, LinkedIn, Lucia, and Rocket Reach are almost one and the same, in that Rocket Reach and Lucia are plug-in tools, websites that you can go to create an account on. They're free to use. They have a limited amount of free use, and then you have to take out a subscription. But depending on how many you do, I think the first 10 searches are free on each. And then you have to take out sort of a small monthly subscription. But basically, you put the person's LinkedIn profile in, and it will give you their email address and their mobile number in some cases. And this is very good for working professionals. I've found with company directors, etc., it's had, I would say, on average, I would say about a 90% success rate for finding people's contact information in some form. And that is a very, very useful tool. I don't have too much experience at the lower end of the market with this, but another tool that, when it comes to the lower end of the market, especially when it comes to residential houses outside of major city hubs, most people still have an entry in the BT phone book or the British phone book. The BT phone book, if anyone doesn't know, is actually digitized. So BT have completely digitized their phone book, and if we just go into Smith, and I don't know, if I just do SO50, you still have a huge number of people still in the BT phone book with their addresses and their phone numbers. I can't tell you the amount of instructions I've had in my life through the BT phone book. People who are already on the market, just calling them up off the BT phone book, having a conversation, booking in a sales director. We've had it as well where, in the past, I've covered territories where I know that my sales director is going to be going out, say on a Wednesday afternoon to this area. I'll call through everyone on the street, and I'll say, look, we're out. We're here on the street. We're visiting, number 5 at 1 o'clock. Would you be interested in getting an up-to-date valuation at say 2:30? More than happy to pop in for 30 minutes and we think of the property. No obligation at all to come to the market. But then, the seed is then planted. They've gone to bed in the evenings. Then they're having a conversation about the fact that it's worth that much money. Maybe we want to think about it. And more often than not, within a 6-month period, if I can book in 5 or 6 valuations off the back of an initial valuation, there's normally another instruction in the pipe there somewhere. And in terms of other tools, you've got local websites as well. I had a £4 million instruction through a local website where the vendor who his property had equine facilities, stabling, and he was on a local group for horse riders. He had a profile there with his mobile number, his office number, his email, etc. and called him up off the back of that, had a conversation about it, ended up booking in a Fine & Country representative who then went on joint sole agent with Knight Frank and with another agent as well.
What?
Sorry? Oh, sorry, I thought someone was asking a question. Social media accounts as well, very useful. LinkedIn. People do occasionally post their contact information on Facebook, on Instagram as well, and other social media pages. Not so much with younger generation, but I do find with people, you know, sort of, I would say past the age of 40 odd, they still post quite actively on Facebook. I've noticed a lot of people of a younger age don't necessarily use Facebook; they're more on Instagram and TikTok. But I've had a lot of useful contacts and things like that through effectively stalking people's social media accounts, which doesn't sound great when you say it out loud, but it has led to quite a few instructions. And then the fifth one is planning portals. So your local council basically keeps a record of all planning applications in the public domain. When someone applies for a planning application, they have to submit their contact details as part of that planning application. And ever since GDPR came in, councils have taken steps to redact that information. However, for historic planning applications, in most cases, they haven't. That information is still out in the public domain. And I remember at one point when I was working, was one of my first jobs in agency at Dexter's, there was a mansion house in Zone 1 where the owner, who was quite a high-profile developer, had left his contact information on a planning application from 2004. So, I mean, they do go back quite far. And I was able to get his mobile phone number through that. And even if councils have redacted the information off the contact form, if it's a brand new development, for example, the chances are that the architect has at least left the name of the person and potentially their contact information on the architect's sketch schemes, on floor plans, blueprints, elevations. I have found planning portals for new build or newer properties, or even properties that have had extensions, for example. There's a wealth of information to be found there. And then there are just the odd website, for example, ancestry.co.uk keeps a registry of people on Ancestry who are happy for their details to be published for people to get in contact if they think they might be related. Now, I'm not saying that you should necessarily use that to generate new business. However, I have had successful instructions through ancestry.co.uk where I've put in the address or the second name of the person, the postcode, and it has come up with that person where all other lines have failed, and I have successfully reached out off the back of that. And even when they've asked me how I got their contact information, I have been truthful in that. But I believe it's paragraph 4 of the General Data Compliance Regulation does state that if you have a legitimate interest, then it is okay to reach out to people. It is okay to cold approach. Now, in terms of territory, and I'm getting a bit more now into the psychology, and again, I don't know exactly how everybody here works with their patches. I appreciate some of the people on this call will only have a dedicated area, where other people, as I understand it, will cover multiple areas. Getting to know your clients and the kind of people that you're targeting is invaluable. Getting to know your patch is invaluable. When I take on a territory, I very quickly identify the top 5% of properties and then work my way back from there. When you're dealing with the upper quartile of the market, especially, you really have to pay attention to the type of vendor that you're dealing with. And as a consequence, the type of patch as well. Sales directors, sales managers, people who go out and do these valuations are each very much their own individual self. And some of them will prefer a very direct approach when it comes to vendors, just sort of getting onto the chatter, and where others will prefer a much more softly approach. So I've had patches in central London, for example, where we can call up a vendor, we'll say we've got buyers, can we come and have a chat to you about doing some viewings this Thursday? We'll pop in on Tuesday to have a quick conversation, and we will line up several buyers for Thursday. We will drag them into that property to view that property, to prove to the vendor that we have people that would be interested. And that is a very direct approach. It's very brash. It's very in the vendor's face, and it can work, and it does work. Where other patches, for example, prefer a very much more of a softly approach, where we're on your street on Tuesday. We'd love to come in for 30 minutes and just see how the sale's going, give you a second opinion, give you our advice on how we might do that. And that has been, in my experience, more of the fine and country way. However, I've had great success in Southampton, for example, with Jack Rees. If anyone knows him, we've done a number of high-profile sales where we've been quite aggressive in our approach. And we've even had one, I remember there was one where it was a 3.6 million, I believe, off the top of my head, house, which hadn't even come to market yet. But we had a buyer, we actually had a real buyer that was looking in the area. And we basically called around all of the properties in that area at that price point and basically said, look, we've got the King family coming down from London. Are you interested in selling? Can we come in on Tuesday? And that did lead to a successful sale. Interestingly enough, Savills had gone in 2 days before us to do a valuation, and we came in at the last minute and basically, oh, hi, Jack's actually in the call. Brilliant. Hi, Jack. I didn't realize you were in. It'd be good to catch up. And that was I can't remember, Jack, I can't remember the lady's name now. It was the Ukrainian lady, but you know the one I'm talking about, Rogate, I think it's called. Very successful one that we had there. And basically it comes down to understanding what your local director wants to do, and basically building your rapport with them, and then figuring out how you're going to approach that together. In terms of booking in appointments, I always send a confirmation to the local director, basically saying, here's the conversation that I've had, here is the jumped ahead a bit there, but basically gives a breakdown of who I've spoken with, how the call went, what the property is, the address, the price, the agent, how I sourced their contact information. So, for example, this was this gentleman's phone number. This was a £2.75 million house that was on the market with Savills in Cobham. And the vendor's information I had got from the land registry, found him in the BT phone book. And after, I think it was actually the first phone call, this one was the first phone call to them. They'd had letters from Fine & Country along with every other agent in the town. I was on the call, I was told that I was the only person that had bothered calling them. But basically got a huge amount of information from them, had the marketing history, etc. I basically debriefed as much as I possibly could. Basically saying, here's the property, all of the information, the conversations. I put notes here, just general notes, which I don't know if anyone's ever seen the scene in Hot Fuzz where Simon Pegg's talking about writing everything down. But that is something that I really can't emphasize enough. The amount of information that you can get from people and the amount of information that you can get online. I remember at one point when I was at Dexter's, we had a vendor who had a penchant, if you will, for fountain pens. And we actually sent around one of our directors with I think it was like £1,000 fountain pen or something like that. It was a well-known branded fountain pen that one of our other directors had bought, and basically built rapport off the back of that, and eventually won the instruction. Did they instruct solely because of the fountain pen? Probably not. But giving your directors as much information as possible is invaluable, and again, just writing everything down is a really good point. This was the property in question, so this was a really nice Queen Anne style house in Cobham, that we ended up taking from Savills and later selling. Interestingly enough, this particular property has just come onto the rental market now, but I'm not sure what the situation is with it. This is a really good example of a more softly approach. So this is a grade 1 star listed estate in Rutland. This was owned by a lord and lady. This is quite a substantial property. To sort of give you an idea, each one of these pavilions here are about 10,000 square foot. I think the whole house in total was around 120 to 150,000 square foot. It had a huge amount of history. One of the founding fathers of America came from here, and this came to the market with Savills at £8 million. And I managed to find the vendor's email through, it was an old website that he had created, I think in the late 1990s, talking about the history of this estate. And for anyone who doesn't know as well, Google, for context, Google will cache all websites and basically data store all websites it's about every 2 years they do this. And if you ever go onto Google and want to find information from a web page that no longer exists, there is a function on, if I just type in, I don't know, if I just go to Launceston, for example, here, which is a town in Devon, you'll see on the search results here, there are 3 dots on Google Chrome. If you click this and go to the arrow, there is a word here called cache. This will bring up, so this Wikipedia entry is a cached Wikipedia entry that no longer exists from about 2 years ago. And this may have been updated now, it may not have been, but this is basically how you get to cached websites. And this is really good for finding information from places that effectively you can't access anymore. But this again was a really good example of a property where I found his old Gmail. It doesn't seem to have gone back to, oh, here we go. Yeah, sorry, it's just a bit of a delay. Found his email from a cache website. And the approach with this property was one where it wasn't going to work going in all guns blazing, saying, we've got buyers, we've got buyers. A vendor of this caliber is someone that you really need to, in my experience, and this is just my experience, I'm sure you may disagree, you need to take your time with. So I ended up doing, I think it was about 3 hours of research on this property before I even sent the email to the vendor. But this was one where I had researched through English Heritage that you can actually see that the roof here has had a degree of damage on this pavilion. And the vendor had spent almost £1 million on the renovation works. And I found a letter that the vendor had written to Historic England saying, basically updating the entry for their records and explaining that, he'd done all of this. And I actually wrote a letter to him on behalf of a fictitious buyer, explaining that we had shortlisted his estate, that we were potentially interested in looking at, but I needed to understand the schedule of works that he had done to the property before we basically took the viewing any further. He engaged with me quite readily off the back of that email, as I had basically shortlisted a number of questions to do with the woodwork and things like that, to say that it was a fictitious buyer would have been a hard sell had I not done the level of due diligence that I had before sending the email. And off the back of this, we ended up getting a valuation on the property, and we did get instructed for a short period of time. However, on this particular one, the vendors actually went into receivership with the bank, and the bank ended up taking over control of the estate. But that, this was one of the more sort of headline listings that I just sort of wanted to use as an example that you do really need to think about the kind of people that you are dealing with, especially at the upper quartile of the market. I've seen a lot of times people that will come in and use the all guns blazing approach of, we've got buyers, can we come in on Thursday? And it doesn't necessarily work when it comes to this sort of level. But yeah, that's basically how I go about doing what I do. I hope that you found that useful. In terms of the future, one thing that I'm actually working on here is a database that eventually will be able to suck up everything, everything in England, that will eventually have, I would say, about 60 to 70% of all property in this country, with the idea that you will effectively be able to call through properties on their anniversary. So on average in this country, people will move house every 5 years. And the goal eventually is to get it to the point where you will call that person 6 months before that decision is made. But that is something that I'm hoping to introduce to the Finding Country network next year. Happy to take any questions if we've got time. I understand, obviously, I've had 25 minutes. So, yeah.
Thanks. Any questions, anyone?
Will, I just want to say a big thank you for sharing your knowledge from years and years of doing this for Dexter's and Foxtons and for Finding Country. Because I just think there's a great opportunity for us to focus on houses that are currently on the market, they haven't sold, and agents are giving up. A lot of these houses are going stale. They need that fresh approach, and this is a great opportunity now to do some detective work and find the owner's name, phone number, email, and contact them. Obviously, we should be visiting them, delivering a magazine, but if we can follow up with an email, phone them, contact them in both of the forms, that there is just there's over I think, Lee, you worked out there's over 3,000 houses for sale in our
3,500, 3,500 we've got.
Over £1 million.
Over £1 million in the area.
So that's 3,500 potential listings and sales.
I'd say, based on my experience, then you should be able to digitally find the contact information based on my rates for about 60 to 70% of those.
Yeah, brilliant.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's working with the agents on the ground who are going to be visiting them anyway, knocking on the door and hopefully getting their name, phone number, and email as well. So that's great. Now the key this is for the agents to work with the administration team and the business generation team, and focus on their area and literally start building that list, that database of all the addresses, the agent is with, the price, and then putting in the name of the seller, their phone number, their email, and really important is what they're looking for, because one of the best ways to help these people is find out what they're looking for and help them find somewhere. And if you do a good job looking after them, staying in touch with them, building a rapport with them, in the end, they're going to come to you to sell their house as well. So what about just a quick question from me, is the actual follow-up system, like once you've got this information, obviously it would depend on the individual, but what's your nurture? Do you have any other nurture?
Sure. So, I basically use Excel spreadsheets and my own in-house database. But we basically, the way that I do it is I will set callbacks for everything that I'm dealing with. So once I've found a property and I've spoken to the vendor, on the phone call, if the vendor is going to push to brush me off and I can't book the appointment, then I will say, okay, well, that's not a problem. I appreciate, you're still in exclusivity, or you're not necessarily interested, or, you may be thinking about coming off the market. I'll give you a call in 2 or 3 weeks and we'll have a catch up. Or, depending on where the conversation's going. If he says, well, I've just got my planning approved and I'm going to do the build out, it's not going to be ready for 6 months, then I'll call him back. I'll say, well, okay, that's no problem. I'll call you back in the summer. I've had ones where I've diarised it for over a year away, just based on the vendor's plans, and we've eventually had instructions off the back of that. But follow up is everything. I try to do it at least once every, ideally 2 weeks as a minimum. Sometimes I'll do it as quick as a week. But it really, again, comes down to the vendor. Once I've handed it over to the front agent, I don't touch it, because then that's in their court. That's them, having those conversations. I'll only get involved really if there's, say, an onward move that needs to be facilitated in some capacity. or a follow-up that, you know, someone needs help with because I haven't necessarily provided, I don't know, title deed or something like that, that I've already got that document, so I can pass that along. But once it's handed over to the front office, it's very rare that I'll get involved with it. Normally it's I will basically chase that until the appointment is booked, and then in the handover email to the agent, I will then give the agent pretty much my entire history working with it, as much information as I can about the vendor, and then send an appointment confirmation to the vendor saying, you know, Jack will be around, for example, on Tuesday at 11 o'clock. I'll CC in Jack on that email, and at that point, that's over to them. That's no longer my domain. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I think unless anyone else has got any other questions on how to find the name and of the owner and their contact information, I think you've given us a great summary, and there's plenty of work to do there. It's just about implementing it and being a detective now, an investigator to get this information.
But so Sean, I was doing it this morning, so I'd spent about 45 minutes this morning just doing one postcode in Derbyshire, and I found 5 contact details within 45 minutes. Mainly email addresses, phone numbers struggled with a little bit. Will, so I don't know if there's any help on that side of it, but
I find Lucia is better than Rocket Reach for phone numbers. And then BT Phone Book is another great way of doing it. I have even had it, actually, funnily enough. I've had it where there was a Savills unit in Fulham that was owned by the founder of Wagamama, and I managed to get his cousin's phone number, and I called the cousin. Now I said, I know this is a bit strange, but your uncle's on the market right now. I found your contact details. I understand you work for the same company. Would you mind introducing me? I think we might have someone interested in the property. And yeah, again, odd way to do it, but that has worked. But yeah, where possible, I always advocate for getting on the phone as opposed to sending a letter or an email, because it's very easy to ignore a letter or an email. When you're talking to someone on the phone, it's much more personal and much easier to build rapport, much easier to get the appointment, basically. And in the ideal scenario, if you're calling them at least once a week or 2 weeks, chances are, in most cases, you're talking to them more than their existing agent. And that gives them a lot to think about when they get off the phone and, you know, they've spoken to you three or four times in the last month, and their agents hardly bothered to call them, especially in a slow market like this. There are units down in the southwest that have, they've been on the market for 4 or 5 months, and the listing agent struts, Knight Frank, haven't heard a peep. And when you call them up and say, oh, I'm calling from Fine and Country, we've got this family down from London, they will entertain you, especially in a market like this. But anyway, hope that helps.
All makes sense. It's just about putting it into action now. So we do supply the addresses, obviously, through Nicola's team and the admin, which we get from Home Search at the minute. Home Search allows us to get the planning information as well directly. You can see any outstanding planning apps. The Business Gen team are going to create campaigns for everybody. So it's just down to the agents to do this in terms of the door knocking, and then supplement it with some digital research as well. No brainer.
Yeah, and phoning, making no phone calls. That's the key, isn't it? Yeah. William, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And
no, I hope it's helped.
Yeah, it's been very, very helpful. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, and we'll report back on our successes.
Fantastic. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Thanks, William. Take care. All the best.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
Thank you.